Mr. Chairman, I was sitting there listening to the comments, opening statements that was made, and I had to take a step back and kind of look at the history that I have been able to perceive in Texas, but it is very difficult for me to look at the history or the progress that maybe African Americans may have made in this country without looking back at the struggles that we have gone through and the struggles that we keep going through. I can understand the position of some of the person who has spoke earlier because they have been a part of the privileged society that I have never been a part of. What I have been concerned about listening to them is their inability to be able to stand in other people's shoes and recognize that the rights that they take for granted to vote in this country, even though we're Americans, we don't all share those same rights. I just want to just digress a minute, if I can. I'm in my 25th session of the legislature, and I have been privileged to represent persons in my district. And one of the members said, well, you shouldn't be here. You should be back in Texas doing this and doing that and those sort of things. And I listened carefully. I'm here because this is the seat of democracy, and my people who I represent has a right to be able to vote unabridged, just like all of you. You may not want to recognize it, but we're supposed to have those rights. That's why I'm here. I'm here fighting for them, and I have the right to fight for them. And someday I'm hoping that I don't have to keep fighting this fight, and my grandchildren and my grandchildren's children will not have to keep repeating these struggles. I was born in Texas, and I can tell you just from my testimony as a child, my grandmother used to work and earn $2 a week working for the privilege. And out of those $2 a week, she used to save pennies and nickels to be able to buy a poll tax. The poll tax, as you know, was created to give people an opportunity to invest in public education support. But if you were white, the grandfather clause took care of you. You didn't have to pay the poll taxes. But my grandmother was African American, and she had to pay those poll taxes. And to pay $1.25, it was difficult to save money. My grandfather couldn't afford to buy poll taxes because they both couldn't afford to have poll taxes. It was too costly. She had to ride a bus to get to the poll tax, a place for colored people to go and vote. And it wasn't a short distance, and transportation was certainly not accessible as it is today. I can tell you, when I first voted, 60-some years ago, I had to buy a poll tax. And they did not exempt me as they did others. And Texas has had a poll tax, and we did not get rid of our poll tax until 1966, even though the law had been passed. I could not vote. My grandmother could not vote in the primary, Chairman Raskin. And you want to know why? Because she was black. And primaries was for white only. And it was not until Smith versus Allred, a case in Texas tried and won by Thurgood Marshall, that gave African Americans a right to have a say in their primary democracy. We're not talking about just something that you can go to the store and use for a little while and toss aside because you've gotten tired of it. We're talking about something that makes and breaks this country when we're talking about the democracy to vote. You're damn right I left Texas, and I'm glad I did. And you know why, Pete, I left them? I left Texas to give my people a right to be able to vote without them being infringed upon. I had a chance to vote during 2010 and 2012. When poll watchers came to my precinct where I vote personally, let me tell you the chilling effect of that. They had people, Chairman Raskin, that looked like they was from the Proud Boys, walking, looking at you like you were in the wrong place. In a minority area, that has a chilling effect. That chilling effect is depression of voting. I don't know what you call intimidation, but intimidation by any other name is still intimidation. It's intimidating, and the word gets out that these people are at your polls looking at you like they want to arrest you, keep you from voting. And people, as a result of that, do not go and cast their vote. I am the voice of my constituents. And if I had to walk to Washington, D.C. to get you to hear what I had to say, to fight for my constituents, I use any means necessary to get my point over. I meet with anyone that they allow me to talk to them about preserving and protecting the rights of my constituents to be able to have a say in their democracy.
My name is Nicole Collier. I currently am elected to serve House District 95 for the last 5 legislative sessions. I currently am also elected to chair the Texas Legislative Black Caucus, which was founded in 1973 with 8 members. Today, we have 19 members. We are a bipartisan, bicameral organization with the goal in mind of addressing the issues affecting African Americans. I want to go back to some of the things that were talked about. And some of you may be asking, why did we ring the alarm? Why are we raising the concern about what's going on in Texas? Well, it's not just happening in Texas. It's happening across our country. We have seen a concerted effort in various states to pass legislation that would limit access to the ballot. It would not expand access, it would reduce access. And what is happening in Texas is no different. You heard about the Republican-appointed Secretary of State who said that the 2020 elections were smooth and secure, and yet we still found ourselves facing legislation to address the elections. I want to also point out some of the things that I want to respond to some of the things that were mentioned. Of course, there are some other legislation that was put on the call from the governor, one of them being critical race theory, which would whitewash the historical systemic racism that has happened in our country. Also is limiting access to legal abortion. That is also on the call. And I would remind everyone that the 13th check, our teachers, retired teachers, have not had a cost of living raise in years. And the Democrats have always advocated for additional funding for our teachers, including the 13th check. In fact, that same bill passed through the Democratic committee quickly and died in the Republican-controlled Calendars Committee. So we have stood for our teachers all along. Another thing that I want to remind you is that there was mention of the walkout of the quorum. That is a procedural method, just like the filibuster is in the Senate. If they don't like a procedure, a policy that's being presented in the Senate, they filibuster. That is just part of the rules, and that is where we have come to see. But what happened in Texas was that we tried to work with our colleagues. We provided amendments. Ms. T, which is Representative Thompson, sat through more than 23 hours of testimony. 400 people came and spoke against this bill, and yet only 65 for it. All the amendments that were presented by our Democratic colleagues were declined on party lines. In fact, there was a vote immediately following the hearing to pass this bill. So there was no interest, there was no even attempt to work and compromise and collaborate with our colleagues on this. Our backs were against the wall. There was no more discussion. We saw the writing on the wall just like it was during the regular session. I was on the conference committee for Senate Bill 7 during the regular session, and it's no different than what we saw in this special session. The bills that were filed would do more harm than good. They would limit access to the polls. You talk about, I've heard people say that we are opposed to voter ID. Well, let me tell you, Texas has been found to violate the Voting Rights Act of 1965 every decade since its passage. We cannot outmobilize racist gerrymandering. And when you talk about having somebody represent the interests of the people, it only reflects the racist gerrymandering that has been taking place in Texas. So we don't have people that represent the communities that they represent. We need to make sure that we have communities, they have to have the ability to represent, elect a candidate of their choice, someone that represents their values, and we're not doing that in Texas. I just want to talk about one of the provisions in the bill. Ms. T, and forgive me, say, for instance, she registered to vote 20 years ago. There's a provision in this bill that would require someone who is eligible to vote by mail to insert their last 4 digits of the driver's license or social security number, or say they don't have one. Now, Ms. T may have registered 20 years ago. She may not remember which one she provided when she originally registered to vote. Under the provisions of this bill, if she put down the other number, even though it's the correct one, her ballot would be rejected. And there's no cure opportunity within this bill to cure her ballot, and she would not even know that her ballot had been rejected. So that's just one instance, and I welcome the opportunity to continue this conversation to provide additional information about why we sounded the alarm.